My grandson pressed a folded piece of notebook paper into my hand during Sunday dinner, right between the moment I reached for the salt and the moment my son's wife laughed too loudly at something she'd said herself. His fingers closed around mine for just a second, tight, urgent, and then he let go and looked back at his plate like nothing had happened at all. I kept my fist closed the whole rest of the meal. I didn't open it until I got to my truck. Grandpa, check Dad's home office, the locked gray cabinet. The key is taped underneath his desk on the left side. You need to see what's in there before Monday. Please don't tell Diane. I'm scared. See, I sat in the dark driveway for a long time reading those words. The handwriting was small and careful, the way my grandson writes when he's trying very hard not to make mistakes. He was 13 years old, and he was scared, and he'd had no one else to tell. I should have known sooner. Looking back now, all the pieces were there. My name is Robert. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years as a firefighter in Charleston, South Carolina, and I retired 4 years ago with bad knees and good memories, and a wife named Eleanor, who had promised me we'd finally see the Pacific Ocean together. We never made it. 18 months ago, Eleanor was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. She was gone in 11 weeks. When you lose someone like that, fast, brutal, no real warning, the grief doesn't come all at once. It comes in waves. Some days you're fine. You make coffee. You water the tomatoes out back. You call your son. Other days, you stand in the grocery store holding a can of the soup she always bought, and you cannot remember what aisle you're in or why you came. My son, Michael, carried that grief differently. He was 39, and he had always been the kind of man who needed someone beside him to function well. Not weak, just wired that way. He needed a partner the way some people need sleep. His first marriage ended when his ex-wife took a job in Raleigh and eventually built a whole new life there. And for 7 years after that, Michael dated sporadically and never let anyone in close. When Eleanor died, I watched something in him go very still and very lonely all at once. He met Diane at a fundraiser for the Children's Hospital about 8 months after the funeral. She was 36, dark hair, a voice like warm water, the kind of woman who makes you feel like you're the most interesting person she's ever talked to. Michael brought her to dinner at my house after 2 months of dating, and she looked around at Eleanor's things, the quilts on the couch, the ceramic cardinal on the windowsill, the family photos on the bookshelf, and she said, "This home has so much love in it. You can feel it." I liked her then. I'm not going to pretend I didn't. They got married after 8 months. I had reservations, but I kept them to myself because Michael was laughing again. Really laughing. The way he laughed before his mother got sick. His son Connor, who splits his time between his mom's place up in Raleigh and Michael's house here in Charleston, told me his dad seemed happy. Connor was 13 and sharp as wire. And if he said his dad was happy, I chose to believe it. That was 10 months ago. Somewhere around the 5th or 6th month of the marriage, I started noticing things I didn't want to notice. Michael began losing weight. Not the lean kind, not the kind that comes from eating better and running more, the other kind, the hollow kind. His face went thin around the jaw, and his shirt started hanging off his shoulders. And when I hugged him, I could feel the space where there used to be more of him. He told me it was stress. His landscaping business had taken on 3 big commercial contracts that spring, and the crews were stretched thin. Plausible. I let it go. Then came the other things. He started repeating himself in conversations, not dramatically, just small loops, circling back to something he'd already said 10 minutes earlier, with no awareness that he'd said it. His hands developed a faint tremor. I noticed at first when he poured coffee into my mug, and the stream wavered slightly. He laughed it off, said he needed more sleep. His eyes, which had always been quick and clear, started looking somewhere just behind whatever he was looking at. I asked him twice if he'd seen a doctor. Both times he said he had, that everything checked out, that he was fine. Both times Diane was in the room, and both times she put her hand on his arm and said, "He's just been pushing himself too hard, Robert. I keep telling him to slow down." I noticed that, too. The way she was always there when I asked. The way her answers came just before his did. Connor noticed everything I noticed and more. But he was a 13-year-old boy watching his father get sick in a house where the new wife controlled the temperature of every room, and he didn't know what to do with what he was seeing. He told me later he'd tried to talk to his mom about it twice, and she'd said Michael probably just needed rest, and that maybe Connor should give his dad some grace during a busy season at work. He tried to mention it to Michael's business partner, and the man had nodded politely and said the same. So, he wrote me a note and pressed it into my hand at Sunday dinner, while Diane talked about the new backsplash she was planning for the kitchen. That was how it started. I went back to Michael's house on Monday morning when I knew both of them would be out. Michael had an early site visit in Mount Pleasant that he'd mentioned the week before. Diane taught yoga at a studio downtown 3 mornings a week. I'd learned her schedule without meaning to, the way you learn the habits of people you're quietly uneasy about. I used the spare key Michael had given me years ago when Eleanor and I used to water his plants while he traveled for work. Nobody had asked for it back. The house felt different in the daytime without people in it, quieter than it should have been. I moved through the living room and down the hall to Michael's home office, a small room at the back of the house that had always been off limits to clutter because Michael ran the billing and contracts for his business from there. The key was exactly where Connor said it would be, taped to the underside of the desk on the left side. A small brass key on a piece of masking tape. My hands were steady. 30 years of firefighting will do that for you. Steady your hands, even when everything inside you is moving fast. But my chest was tight in a way I hadn't felt in years. The gray cabinet was a 2-drawer metal filing cabinet pushed against the far wall. I crouched down and opened the bottom drawer first, hanging files labeled in Michael's handwriting, business contracts, tax records, equipment receipts. Normal. I moved to the top drawer. 3 folders, all unmarked on the tabs. I pulled the first one. The top document was a power of attorney. Michael's name as principal. Diane's name as agent granting her authority over his financial and legal affairs. In the event that he became unable to make decisions independently. It was dated 8 weeks ago. The signature at the bottom was Michael's name, but something was wrong with it. I've seen my son's signature on birthday cards, on checks he handed me over the years, on the paperwork when he bought his first truck. His capital M has a particular little hitch in it, a leftward lean at the peak, a habit so consistent it might as well be a fingerprint. This signature had the right letters in roughly the right proportions, but the hitch wasn't there. The M was smooth, practiced, but not his. Under the power of attorney was a deed addendum for Michael's house. The original deed listed Michael as sole owner. The addendum, also dated within the last 2 months, added Diane as co-owner with right of survivorship, meaning that if Michael died, the house became hers. Automatically, outside of any will, outside of any probate. Under that was a beneficiary change form for Michael's life insurance policy. I knew about that policy. Eleanor and I had helped Michael set it up years ago when Connor was born. $750,000. The original beneficiary was Connor. The change form dated 6 weeks ago redirected the full amount to Diane Hartwell with no contingent beneficiary listed. Connor's name had been removed entirely. My son's only child had been erased from his father's life insurance policy without Connor knowing, without me knowing, and almost certainly without Michael understanding clearly what he was agreeing to. I sat back on my heels on the floor of that office, and I made myself breathe. I opened the second folder, a Ziploc bag sealed, containing white capsules in unmarked gelatin shells, 18 or 20 of them, maybe more. No label, no prescription information, nothing to identify them at all. Beneath the bag, a small spiral notebook with a green cover, the kind you find in drugstores for $2. I opened it. The entries were handwritten. Her handwriting. I recognized it from grocery lists she'd left on the kitchen counter on nights I'd come over for dinner. Neat, slightly backslanted, looped E's. The first entry was dated 4.5 months ago. Started with 1 capsule in the afternoon smoothie. No visible effect that evening. We'll try 2 tomorrow. I turned the page. Day 4. 2 capsules. Same method. Some confusion at dinner. Asked me twice what day it was. Said he felt foggy. Told him it was probably dehydration. I kept reading. The entries went on for pages. They documented a timeline of methodical, deliberate poisoning. Dosages increased gradually. Effects were cataloged the way you'd track a science experiment. The tremor appearing first in the left hand, then spreading. Memory gaps that started as occasional and became frequent. 2 entries mentioned near falls. One entry said simply, "Nearly called 911 tonight. Too soon. Need more time." The final entry, written 4 days before the Sunday dinner, where Connor handed me the note, read, "M signed the POA and the deed change." Wasn't sure he understood what he was signing. Doesn't matter now. Schedule with Hrix next week to finalize the rest. Chris. I didn't know who that was yet. I would find out. I photographed every page of that notebook on my phone. I photographed the Ziploc bag, the capsules, the documents. I did it slowly and carefully, making sure every image was in focus, every word legible. 31 years of documenting fire scenes before investigators arrived had taught me that sloppy documentation is the same as no documentation at all. Then I opened the third folder, several printed photographs, aerial-style images of my house printed from what looked like a real estate listing website. My house had been listed when I bought it 12 years ago, and that listing was still indexed somewhere online with photos of the exterior, the backyard, the 2-car garage. Someone had printed them and underlined the listed square footage and lot size in pen, a printout of my county property records showing the assessed value of my home at $380,000. A folded sheet of yellow legal paper. I unfolded it at the top in her handwriting assets overview. Below that, 2 columns. M Life, license dollar. $750,000, updated house dollar. $520,000, business S dollar. $180,000, $220,000. Total approx $147 million. Our home dollar. 380,000 retirement axes. From M dollar. 290,000 total approximately. 670,000. Combined approximately $2 1 M plus. And at the bottom of the page, circled twice in blue pen. Timeline M completed by late summer. Our target follow use same method. Adjust dosage for age. Wait. I read those words 4 times. She wasn't just poisoning my son, she had a schedule. Michael was supposed to be dead by late summer, and I was supposed to follow in the fall. I was 64, 4 years old, and I had just found a document that put a season on my death. I folded the legal paper carefully, photographed it, put it back exactly as I'd found it. I put every folder back in the precise order I'd found them. I locked the cabinet, replaced the key under the desk, and walked out of Michael's house the same way I'd walked in. I sat in my truck in the driveway for a while, not in shock. I've seen enough bad things in my life to know that shock isn't useful and doesn't last. I was thinking, planning. If I had learned anything in 31 years of walking into burning buildings, it was this. You don't rush toward the thing you can't yet control. You assess, you plan, and then you move with everything you have. If I went to the police right then with photographs on my phone, what would they have? A power of attorney that might have been legitimately signed. A deed change that could be argued was a mutual decision. A beneficiary change form that was entirely legal on its face. A bag of unidentified capsules that anyone could claim were vitamins. A notebook full of entries that could be dismissed as one spouse's worried journaling about a sick husband's symptoms. A list of assets on a legal pad that any defense attorney would call circumstantial at best. I needed more. I needed her caught in the act. I drove home, and I called the one person I trusted completely with something like this. His name is Frank. We came up through the fire academy together 40 years ago, and when he retired from Charleston PD after 28 years, he became the most well-connected civilian I knew. Frank had spent the last decade doing private investigative work, mostly insurance fraud and domestic cases, and he had a mind like a steel trap and a network of contacts that ran from the county courthouse to the state crime lab. I told him everything on the phone. He didn't interrupt once. When I finished, he was quiet for 3 seconds, which is a long time for Frank. You said she used the word method in that note. Same method. That means she's done this before, or she knows exactly what she's using and she believes it works consistently. That's not amateur hour, Bobby. That's someone who planned this before she ever walked into your son's life. I'd thought the same thing. Can you find out who she is? Where she came from before Charleston? Already thinking about it. Don't touch anything else in that house. Don't move the capsules. Don't take anything. Let her think nothing has changed. I know, I said. I know how evidence works. I also know a judge who can sign off on a warrant faster than most if what you're describing is documented properly. But we need one more thing. We need her on camera doing it. That night, Connor called me. He had never called me before. He always texted, always short messages, the way teenagers communicate. When my phone lit up with his name at 9:30 at night, I answered before the first ring finished. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper. Grandpa, did you go? Yes. Did you find it? I found everything. Are you somewhere she can't hear you? He was in his bedroom with the door locked. He told me he'd been watching for 6 weeks, that it had started when he was washing dishes one evening and looked through the kitchen doorway and saw Diane open a container of what she told Michael were his new magnesium supplements. Doctor recommended, she'd said, and tapped 2 capsules into her palm before taking them back to Michael in the living room. The next morning, Michael was confused and slow in a way that scared Connor. He connected the dots the way a scared kid connects dots. Not with certainty, but with that gut-level dread that doesn't go away, even when you tell yourself you're being paranoid. He'd looked up the capsule container later when Diane was out. It was in the cabinet, unlabeled, tucked behind a vitamin D bottle. He'd taken one and photographed it with his phone, and then looked up how to identify unmarked white capsules and gone down a rabbit hole online that frightened him badly enough that he didn't sleep for 2 nights afterward. Why didn't you call me sooner? I asked him. He was quiet for a moment. I didn't want to be wrong. I thought maybe I was just, I don't know, making it into something. Mom said Dad was probably just stressed. I didn't want to be the kid who blew up his dad's marriage over nothing. He was 13 years old, and he'd been carrying the weight of the possible murder of his father for 6 weeks by himself, because he was afraid of being wrong, and afraid of being the kind of kid who causes problems. I told him he was the bravest person I knew, and I meant it without qualification. Is Dad going to be okay? Yes, I said. But I need you to do one thing for me. When you're in that house, you act completely normal. You don't change anything about how you talk to her or how you act around her. Can you do that? Another pause. Yeah, he said. I can do that. Good, Connor. You did the right thing. You did exactly the right thing. I could hear him exhale, a long, shaky breath. 6 weeks of held tension finally finding somewhere to go. Frank moved fast. Within 48 hours, he'd found out enough about Diane's background to make my blood pressure spike. She had lived in 3 states in the past 8 years, Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida, and she'd been married once before to a man named Gerald, who'd had a slow cognitive decline over about 8 months before dying of what was ruled a cardiac event at 57. Gerald's estate had passed to Diane. The estate was substantial. She'd sold the house in Savannah inside of 4 months, liquidated Gerald's retirement accounts, and moved to Tennessee. 18 months later, she moved again. She arrived in Charleston 2.5 years ago. No prior connection to the city. No family here. She picked your son. Frank told me she picked him on purpose. Single father, recently widowed parent, successful small business, no close siblings, social network small and contained. She looked for exactly the right circumstances, and she found them. He reached out to a contact at the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, who had been peripherally involved in a quiet review of Gerald's death 2 years ago, a review that had been closed for lack of evidence. Frank's contact was very interested to hear what we'd found. Meanwhile, Frank arranged for a licensed private investigator, a woman named Dana, who specialized in domestic fraud cases, to place a small camera in Michael's kitchen. In South Carolina, recording in common areas of a residence where you have legitimate access is permissible under certain conditions, and Dana knew exactly which conditions applied. She handled it legally and carefully. The camera went in on a Tuesday morning when Michael was at work and Diane had her yoga class. We waited 4 days. On Friday evening, Dana called me with a voice that was perfectly controlled, but had something behind it that I recognized as contained fury. "I have it," she said. Clear footage timestamp. She's in the kitchen. She's opening the cabinet. She's taking out a container with no label. She taps capsules into her hand. She puts them into his drink. She looks around the kitchen first to make sure no one's watching. She stirs the drink. She brings it to him in the living room. I had to sit down. "It's enough," Dana said. "Combined with the notebook and the documents. It's enough." Frank's contact at the county had a judge sign an emergency warrant the next morning. By Saturday afternoon, 2 investigators were in Michael's house with a search warrant. They collected the cabinet contents, the capsule container, samples from the kitchen, and 2 additional items they found during the search that none of us had known about: a burner phone registered to a name that didn't exist, and a folder in Diane's car containing printed emails between her and a man named Hicks, who turned out to be a disbarred attorney operating out of North Augusta, who had apparently helped her arrange the fraudulent legal documents. Diane was arrested in the driveway when she returned from her afternoon errands. She didn't say a word when the handcuffs went on. She looked at me. I was standing on the sidewalk because the investigator had asked me to wait there. And she looked at me with an expression I still think about sometimes. It wasn't rage and it wasn't fear. It was something colder than both of those, the look of someone recalculating. Whatever she was recalculating, she ran out of time to use it. The capsules were analyzed by the state crime lab. They contained a compound combination, including prescription-grade sedative agents and a substance used in veterinary medicine that in cumulative doses over weeks causes progressive neurological impairment. In high enough sustained quantities, it can cause respiratory suppression. The lab technician who testified at the preliminary hearing said it had likely been used in at least one prior documented human poisoning case in Florida, a case that had initially been ruled natural causes, but was now being re-examined. Michael was admitted to the hospital the week after Diane's arrest. The neurologist ran a full panel. The damage from 5 months of cumulative dosing was real, but the doctor was careful about the word she chose. Reversible, she said. With time, some of it, the tremor in his hands began to improve within 3 weeks of the dosing stopping. His memory gaps narrowed. He started eating again, and the hollows in his face began to fill back in. I visited him every day during those 3 weeks. We didn't talk about Diane much. There would be time for that later when his mind was clearer and he was ready. We talked about his business, about Connor, about a fishing trip we'd talked about taking for 15 years and never actually taken. We talked about Eleanor. He cried once, sitting in the hospital chair in the afternoon light, and I didn't say anything, just sat with him the way his mother would have sat with him. Connor flew down from Raleigh when his mom found out what had happened. He walked into Michael's hospital room, and Michael held on to him for a long time without saying anything. Later, when I stepped out to get coffee, Connor followed me into the hallway. "Is he actually going to be okay?" he asked me. Same question as the night he'd called me. Different voice this time, less frightened, more like a kid who needs a number confirmed. "Yes," I said. "He's going to be okay." Connor nodded slowly. He was looking at the floor tiles. I kept thinking I was wrong. Like, I watched her do it, and I still kept telling myself, maybe I was wrong. You weren't wrong, I know. But I kept waiting for someone to tell me I was imagining things. I handed him his coffee. He had recently started drinking it, half coffee and half hot chocolate, which I had decided to find endearing rather than alarming. And I thought about what to say to him. "Can I tell you something?" I said. In 31 years of firework, the single most common thing I saw that made disasters worse was people who noticed something wrong and talked themselves out of it. The smell that wasn't quite right. The flicker in the wrong place. The instinct that said something is off. The ones who listened to that instinct and acted on it, they saved lives. The ones who waited until they were 100% certain. Sometimes it was already too late. He looked up at me. "You listened to your instinct. You acted on it. You saved your father's life, and you probably saved mine. You're 13 years old, and you did something that most adults can't make themselves do." He didn't say anything for a moment. "Then you're going to tell this story to like everyone, aren't you?" "Every chance I get," I said. He almost smiled. It was the first almost smile I'd seen from him in weeks, and it hit me somewhere around the sternum and stayed there. The legal proceedings moved faster than I expected. Diane was charged with 2 counts of aggravated poisoning, 1 count of attempted murder, forgery of legal documents, financial fraud, and conspiracy. The disbarred attorney in North Augusta was picked up within the week and charged separately. The Georgia Bureau of Investigation formally reopened the case of Gerald's death from 3 years earlier and filed additional charges connecting her to that case as well. Her attorney tried several angles in the preliminary hearings. The power of attorney had been freely signed. The deed change was a mutual marital decision. The notebook was personal health journaling. The capsules were a homeopathic supplement she'd been researching for Michael's fatigue. Every one of those angles hit the footage from Dana's camera and crumbled. The footage was 17 seconds long. It was clear and time-stamped and showed exactly what it showed. Her attorney's counter-narratives required a jury to believe that a woman deliberately checking over her shoulder before adding unidentified capsules to her husband's drink was engaged in benign homeopathic care. Juries tend not to believe that. She took a plea. 18 years, no early release for the first 12. The plea covered the Charleston charges. The Georgia case was still in motion. The fraudulent power of attorney was vacated. The deed addendum was rescinded. The beneficiary change on Michael's life insurance policy was reversed. Connor's name went back where it belonged. I talked to Michael the day the plea was entered. We were sitting on my back porch, same porch where I used to sit with Eleanor on summer evenings, and the light was doing the gold thing it does in the late afternoon in Charleston, when the humidity is just so, and everything looks slightly more real than real. Michael had his coffee. His hands were mostly steady now. "Did you know anything was wrong?" I asked him, not accusatory, just the question I'd been carrying. He thought about it. I knew I felt terrible. I thought it was grief. I thought it was the business stress. I thought I was getting old. He was 39 years old when she started poisoning him. There were times I thought something was off about her. Not with a relationship with me, like I couldn't get a clear look at anything. Everything felt like I was seeing it through water. That was the compound. That's what it does. Blurs the edges. He nodded slowly. He set his coffee down and looked at the yard at the tomato plants I'd transplanted from Eleanor's garden, which had somehow survived 4 seasons now and kept coming back. "I almost called you once," he said, "about 3 months ago. I was having a good day, one of the clear days, and something in me thought something is not right, and you need to call your dad." And then she came in and handed me a drink and said I looked tired and I should rest. And by evening, I couldn't remember what I'd been planning to do. She'd timed it. She'd known when he was reaching toward clarity, and she'd cut it off. "Connor saved us," I said. Michael looked at me. His eyes were clear in a way they hadn't been for months. All the fog burned off. "Yeah," he said. He really did. "There are things I've been thinking about since all of this ended, and thinking about them is part of what has made me want to talk about it. The first thing is this. I almost talked myself out of going to that office. Standing at the front door with my spare key in my hand, I had a full minute of internal argument that went something like, "She's his wife. This is his private office. You have no right. You're an old man projecting. You're still grieving, Eleanor, and you're looking for something to be angry at." The version of me who listened to that argument is a version of me who finds out about this a different way. Too late at a funeral. The second thing is Connor. He was a 13-year-old boy who had every reason to keep his head down and stay quiet. New stepmother in the house. Complicated custody situation. A father he didn't want to upset. A mother who'd already dismissed his concerns once. He had every reason to tell himself he was imagining things. He chose not to. He watched. He gathered what information he could. And then he found the one adult he thought might actually listen, and he handed that adult a folded piece of notebook paper with shaking hands and trusted that it would be enough. It was enough because he did it. The third thing is Eleanor. I think about her when I think about this story, which is often she would have known. She always knew when something was wrong, not through any mystical intuition, but through the same thing Connor used, sustained attention. She paid attention to the people she loved. She noticed the small things. She would have noticed Michael getting thinner, and she would not have rested until she understood why. I think about how she raised our son to be a man who could be loved, which made him a man who could also be targeted. I think about how she raised me in her way to be someone worth being found when things went wrong. I think about her every day regardless, but in this particular story, I think about her as the standard, the benchmark. Pay attention. Notice the small things. When something is wrong, don't wait until you're certain. Certain is a luxury that circumstances don't always extend. Michael is back at work. He had some follow-up appointments through the fall, and the neurologist cleared him for full activity by November. He and Connor went to a Braves game in Atlanta in September, just the two of them, which they hadn't done since Connor was 7. He texted me a photo from the stadium, the two of them in the upper deck. Connor grinning with something around his jaw that is starting to look less like a boy's face and more like a man's face, and Michael with his arm around his son's shoulders, and both of them squinting happily into the afternoon sun. I looked at that photo for a long time. I have it on my refrigerator now next to a photo of Eleanor. The fishing trip. The one Michael and I had been talking about for 15 years. We finally took it in October. 3 days on the water off Folly Beach. Nothing biting for most of the first day, which gave us a lot of time to sit and not say anything, which is underrated. Connor came for the last day and caught the biggest fish, which he took great and entirely warranted pride in, and which I threatened to have mounted on the wall of my garage, which he threatened to disown me over. I'm a long way from the driveway where I sat in my truck reading a note a scared boy had pressed into my hand. A long way from the gray cabinet in the home office, from the pages of that green notebook, from the folded yellow legal paper with my name and a season written next to it. But here's what I know from all of it. The good people in your life will try to reach you when it matters. They will try to find a way through. Sometimes they're young and scared, and they're not sure you'll believe them, and they hand you a piece of paper with shaking hands. Your job is to be the person they trust to receive it. Your job is to listen. I choose every day to be that person. I've known it matters since the night I sat in my truck reading my grandson's handwriting in the dark. I've known it matters since the moment he looked up at me at the hospital, coffee and hot chocolate, and almost smiled for the first time in weeks. The good guys can win. I've seen it happen. All it took was one boy willing to be brave and one old man willing to finally pay attention.